Okay, cool. So if anyone, wants to watch this afterwards, it will be on our website. Also, just as a note, this will be a lot more general than the RA panel that we had last week. So there are many diverse career paths, and it's a lot more variable than just an RA job, I suppose. So we're going to leave a bit more time to the Q&A. So if anyone has questions later on, just type them down in the chat below, and we'll get around to it. So to start off, how about we let the panel introduce themselves? If you could just tell us your name, your year, your major, and what you're planning to do after graduation, that'd be great. You can, whoever wants to go first.
I guess I can go first. I'm Elena. You may recognize me as the Oeconomica research director, and I'm a fourth year, obviously. After graduating, I will be working as a research assistant at the New York Federal Reserve. And I think something that's important is that this is probably the job that is closest to research, or it really kind of is research, it's just not at a university, it's at the Fed, of the ones being discussed this evening. And we can get into that later. I guess maybe Nikhil would like to go next.
Sure, I can go next. My name's Nikhil. I'm a fourth year. I study applied math and economics. And after I graduate, I'm going to be joining the antitrust and competition economics practice of Charles River Associates in Chicago. It's basically econ consulting. It's not quite as much like research like what Elena's doing, but it's sort of still very research heavy. Yeah.
I can go next just because Nikhil and I have somewhat similar backgrounds. I'm Alex. I'm also a fourth year. I'm also studying math and economics, and I'm also going to work in an office of an economic consulting group called Analysis Group, doing broadly antitrust work. Like Nikhil said, it's not as much research focused. However, especially at the higher levels of economic consulting, there is still some opportunity for individual research. And just as like a fact, in one of my classes, we're actually working through a paper that's a statistics paper that one of the co-authors works in economic consulting. So there is still some flexibility there.
I'm John. I'm a fourth year. I study economics and philosophy. And after graduating, I'll be joining Citi's investment banking division in their financial strategy and solutions group, which is one of the more kind of researchy, quantitative sorts of paths you can take through the finance world, but probably less researchy than the other things mentioned here.
Great, so this panel is pretty diverse. We've got research, we've got economic consulting, and then we've got finance. So I guess the most natural question to start off with is, what made you decide to go down this path? We could go in the same order as just now.
Okay. So I plan to go to graduate school. And so the natural path then is, if you're planning on taking some time off and working beforehand, is most people go into either becoming a research assistant for a professor, working at a research organization, or economic consulting. There's also pre-doc programs, but those are kind of overlap a little bit with working for a professor, and pre-doc programs aren't really the same as like working in the real world for a break from school. So that was a pretty big factor right there, as that kind of instantly creates a much smaller sphere of what kinds of things I would be looking for in terms of like a postgraduate opportunity or post-undergrad opportunity. And then as for the Federal Reserve in particular, last year I applied for their summer internship for juniors, and at the end was offered a position, and at that point, the logical thing would be to take it. So I guess that kind of explained it. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of similar-ish. I think I probably want to go to graduate school. I don't think I'm as certain as you, Elena. And that's something that econ consulting is really good for, is you have a lot of option value. Basically, everyone who does econ consulting ends up doing it for 2 to 4, maybe 5 years, then going on to like an MBA, a JD, sometimes a PhD. So I know I want to do some sort of higher education beyond sort of college, but I don't know what exactly yet. Probably a PhD, but econ consulting is a really good way to sort of maximize my option value and sort of how I'm rationalizing it now. In terms of actually getting into it, I sort of fell into it during sort of junior recruiting, and then it's worked out really nicely. I worked there last summer, loved the job, and got my return offer. I'll be joining them.
Like Tequila, I kind of just fell into it. I was looking for jobs where I got to apply a little bit more of my like quantitative skills. My sophomore year summer, I'd done internship in investment banking and decided that really wasn't what I wanted to do. But I still had like an interest in being in the private sector and being involved in like this type of environment where there's like deals going on and like something that's sort of high paced. But at the same time, I did want to keep a lot of doors open, and maybe there's like a 20% chance I decide to go to grad school. And I kind of want to keep it at 20% until I decide, after having been out of school for a little bit of time. So economic consulting just kind of fit that. I really had no idea even what it was until my junior year when I started like doing the actual recruiting. And I think for the underclassmen here, it's pretty good that you guys are going to be aware of the options available to you beforehand.
Yeah, and so in terms of how I wound up here, I spent my summer after first year doing kind of research work and decided it was a little bit slow for me. Then the summer after that, I was doing consulting work and I decided it was a little bit too light for me and I wanted to do something kind of a little bit more quantitative and rigorous. And then my summer after third year, which was this past summer, I found this group and I really enjoyed it. So I'm going back, and I'd echo a lot of the things that have already been said. I think one of the pieces that I value most about this is there's a lot of option value. I could stay in the group for a very long time if I wanted to, or I could exit into all kinds of different firms, or an MBA or higher education and grad school sort of thing. A lot of people go on to get PhDs in statistics, finance, those sorts of things. And then I'd also say that you know, experimenting, testing, trying different things, seeing what works with you, what you're enjoying is definitely a good tool to use to end up somewhere where you're kind of enjoying what you're doing. I think each time I've made a move, there have been things that I've enjoyed more and enjoyed less than the previous place, and it's good to kind of take note of that and then over time get a sense of where you're fitting in best, where you're providing value in a way that you're enjoying the way you're spending your time.
I just want to make a quick side note, which is that being on this panel means that we are fourth years who already know what we're planning on doing. The vast majority of fourth years do not necessarily have something definitive at this point in time, and it is totally okay for that to be the case. I realized, since all of us are coming from this position of we did this summer internship, we liked it, we took the return offer that we received, or we received a return offer and we took it, like, that is not necessarily what everyone does for a lot of reasons. And just wanted to make sure that that was out there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's for anyone who's watching, this is just meant to be informative, right? So by no means do you have to go down that specific path. It's totally fine if you don't have an opportunity yet. But also, congratulations to everyone here who actually, did get a job offer. That's very cool stuff. And so I kind of wanted to ask, what kind of undergraduate opportunities do you think helped you the most, or rather didn't help you that much in deciding what you wanted to do? Like, what kind of classes do you think helped make that decision? What kind of RSO opportunities helped you make that decision? If you could speak more about that.
Are we just always going in the same order?
You can mix it up. That's totally fine.
I can start if you want.
Sure.
I think a lot of the classwork that's sort of been helpful for me has been my econ electives, especially metrics. I think taking metrics, especially if you have it with someone who is good, is really helpful. In terms of other stuff I did, I had a bit of a background in startups. I worked at a couple startups during my time at UChicago, and sort of getting that ability to work under, I feel like that was more pressure than my classwork, and getting that sort of ability to work under pressure was really, it's been really helpful in almost everything for me. I think also just definitely taking like a metrics elective or something, maybe some sort of IO, it's been good.
As far as deciding what I liked in particular, I think computer science and statistics classes were useful for me to decide, like, well, if I'm gonna look at the slate of options open to me after, maybe I would like to do something in this vicinity. That said, I've made a concerted effort not to focus exclusively on those things, just because like I have other interests and I also want to fulfill those interests. So I'm gonna be coming away from college with like a pretty diverse set of classes, and I don't think like diving totally into statistics really would have prepared me any better. For me though, RA work was probably the most like impactful in determining like, this is actually what I want to do, because it's one thing to take the CS 120s and say, well, I'm happy to program stuff, but it's like a very linear process. And it's a totally different thing for a PhD student to say, oh, solve this problem. And you like have to totally just deal with the data manipulation yourself and like research exactly how you're supposed to be structuring things for a particular model. And having that exposure, particularly my third year, made me realize that was something that I wanted to do.
I don't know if I could point to any particular class or kind of RSO activity, on-campus engagement that guided my career interests. I think I'd probably caution against using classes too much and trying to figure out what you want to do in terms of a career, because there's so many options. Like, I think the people here, we all tend to have jobs that pretty like reasonably align with different areas of academic pursuit. But there are all kinds of jobs that like aren't going to cleanly fit into something that you could come to realize you're interested in just by having taken some cool classes. I would definitely say like metrics classes will be productive for me in my work. CS classes, Booth, like corporate finance, investments, that kind of work is all useful for investment banking. Financial accounting is essentially a must. A lot of the interview questions will revolve around financial accounting for most investment banking positions. Less so for my group because they're more quantitative, so they're more focused on statistics. Yeah, I guess if I were to point to one thing, I'd say Trot was helpful to me, because I kind of got a sense of the different areas of the business world and found kind of an area that worked well with me.
Yeah, so I think I would definitely agree in terms of like, don't base your like career choices off of your classes. They're not going to be representative in any, well, okay, maybe there's some that'll have some like hints, but like in general, they're not going to be super representative. I think for me, I came in very sure that I wanted to go to graduate school. And if anything, my like since first year, like I'm still fairly sure that I want to go to graduate school, but if anything, that like sureness has like declined a little bit. It's mostly been like well, anyway. And so what that meant was a few different things, right? First, I was fairly sure that I wanted to do things involving research, and I was fairly sure that I also wanted to do things involving policy. So I spent a bunch of time exploring different kind of options on what I kind of consider like, I don't know, a spectrum from like pure policy to pure research. And that helped me know that like, no, I don't particularly like the things that are like closer to policy, or as in certain ways. And I think also though having this idea that I would be going to grad school has had this other effect for me, which is that there are classes that are incredibly helpful technically, and there are classes that are like maybe kind of technically helpful, but like you would get, but maybe are not necessarily very well suited to an undergraduate level class. And if you know that you are going to go to grad school, then it does not necessarily make sense to take a class that you will have to take in grad school anyway, that will be taught at a more appropriate level in grad school, as opposed to like some weird kind of pseudo watered down thing taught in undergrad. So that certainly affected like my class choices. And then I think in terms of courses that are helpful for research, that can be really hard, because what you cover, even in an econometrics class, it will be very helpful, but it's not what you do in research. So if you're looking for classes that are kind of helpful in terms of research, look for classes where the syllabi are based around papers, classes where you have a final project instead of an exam, or sometimes both if your professor enjoys making you suffer towards the end of the quarter. All of those kinds of things are more representative of what research is like than even some of the best econometrics classes, for instance.
Yeah, those are definitely all great things to look out for. And if I may share my totally unbiased opinion, I think Oeconomica is a great place to gain exposure to different fields of economics. So definitely tell your friends to check it out. You get to watch cool panels like this one. But anyway, my next question would naturally be, what is the recruiting process like? So I imagine it'll be kind of different based on what you do. So could you talk us through, like, you know, the applications, the actual interviews, like what's the entire process look like?
I can start. I guess I can give a broad overview of banking recruiting, and then I can give a little bit of an aside on my specific group, because it works a little bit differently. The way most of banking works is it's all oriented around networking, because you got to get those interviews. So you come up with a nice polished resume. Business Career Services will help you do that. You know, upperclassmen friends will help you get your resumes in shape. And then it's a lot of like spamming to random people on LinkedIn, or like random people in the alumni database asking for a phone call, and getting in touch with people who work in different areas, in, you know, different groups in different cities, and, you know, talking to them, hearing what their work is like, connecting, kind of getting a sense of what the culture is like in different firms and different groups. And then, you know, hopefully you get an interview, and the applications themselves are kind of, I don't think they're all that important. It's mostly just like your resume and then a bunch of logistics, like your name and your address. And it's not like an application in the way that I thought of an application before going through this process, like, you know, writing essays and whatever. The closest thing to writing a substantial essay you'll do is a cover letter, other than maybe a few banks that'll give you sections for like 300 words on, you know, why you're interested in the bank or the group. Then a lot of firms will do hire views, which are like first round video interviews. Those are certainly interesting. You'll get like 1 or 2 tries to record your answer to some question, and they'll have some person go through all the responses. And then, you know, if that goes well, then oftentimes you'll have phone interviews. And the way a lot of, it's different for, I should be using this caveat at every step of the way. It's different for every group. It's different for every firm. But the general process is like typically over the course of about a week, you'll have a series of phone interviews. And, assuming all of those go well, if each one goes well, they'll pass you on to the next person. And if all those go well that weekend or like early the next week, they'll fly you out to wherever the group is located, and you'll have a super day, which is just a whole day of back-to-back interviews. And then typically, kind of within, I'd say 48 hours of the super day, whether or not you receive the job offer. And that process, it's moving more, it's moving forward every year. So I've spoken to people 3 or 4 years out, and right now when they were looking for jobs right now in their college career was when they started. But I started kind of angling for these types of jobs, I'd say somewhere in my second year. So you start early, and then, ideally you get that third year internship and that converts into a full-time thing. But there is also full-time recruiting. If you miss, if you don't have an investment banking thing your third year, you could do something else your third year. It's definitely a lot easier to get the return offer than it is to do full-time recruiting. Especially, speaking to friends now who are recruiting during COVID, it's particularly difficult. A lot of firms aren't hiring right now, full-time recruiting. And then just a brief aside on my group in particular, it's a lot less focused on, they care a lot more about what you say than what you're supposed to know. Most investment banking groups, there's a set of things that you're supposed to know. You read the Vault guide and 400 questions. You're supposed to be able to answer these kinds of things because it shows that you have an interest in banking. But for my group, it's more whatever's on your resume, they're going to grill you on that, because if you claim to know it, they want to make sure that you actually know it. So yeah, that's broadly the process for banking.
I remember interviewing for FSG and getting grilled on random stuff from Yoshida 202. Econ consulting is really, the recruiting is very different from banking and from FSG. I think there's a lot less emphasis on networking. Alex, you can disagree. If you disagree, tell me. But I didn't network at all to get my internship. I just applied on Handshake, and they gave me a first round interview. For UChicago, they do all the first rounds for interns on site. And then from there, it's either, for me, I got my offer immediately after my first round. But sometimes they'll do more rounds. I know I have a couple of friends, especially for other offices, who did 2 or 3 rounds. In terms of timeline, usually this is early October to late October. Interviews are kind of different from firm to firm. It's very hard to prep for econ consulting interviews. I think the only thing you can really do is, know your micro, just understand the concepts, and be able to talk about your sort of workflow for working with dirty data sets. I think the thing that was really helpful for me was the summer before I was recruiting, I had just been working with this awful data set at a nonprofit, and was able to spend 5 minutes just talking with my interviewers about how awful the data set was, and vibe worked.
Yeah, broadly, economic consulting recruits in the fall, so the timeline's a lot later than it is for investment banking. And even for management consulting, it's a bit later. Networking is really de-emphasized. I did some light networking, and maybe it helped, but it probably did nothing. Then it's just a question of, you submit your resume, you submit a cover letter, and in some cases you submit a writing sample, which is generally a few pages from a paper you wrote if it has some quantitative component, or I just happened to have written a long policy like brief, and I submitted like 10 pages from that. You don't really have to prepare for writing sample component. It should just kind of come naturally if you take like economic policy analysis or something. But you can always like go back and make it better if you decide that's what you want to do. But if you pass that, then there's a first round on campus. Right now it's probably virtual. And then in most cases, there's a second round. I think Nikhil's a bit of an exception, and it's something like a super day. And you basically meet everybody at whatever office you're going for, unless it's a big office. And then they're mostly fit-based interviews, to be honest. But you do have to know some micro and statistics and CS to be able to respond. I had one case for an economic consulting firm where they actually gave me a written coding test, which is it's the exception, but it does exist.
Yeah, so working as a research assistant for the Fed is probably the most different from all of those, and in general, working in the public sector. So there's a couple important things about it. First, so I guess for my process in particular, working for the Federal Reserve, so the deadlines are actually earlier than you'd think for a public policy job. Most public policy jobs are in like January or February even, where the applications come out. But working for the Federal Reserve and for the Federal Reserve, presumably for government contractors and for a lot of government agencies, the application deadlines are much earlier because you have to get a security clearance, and that takes time. So for the New York Fed in particular, their deadline was like October 31st, and it's like you submit your resume, your cover letter, whatever it was, some generic kind of application requirement type thing. I forget whether or not they required a writing sample. I think they didn't. And then, so speaking in particular about the New York Fed, I'm kind of assuming that other Federal Reserve banks have like a similar process, but like who knows? They have a research group, and within the research group, they have a bunch of different functions that are kind of like functions to focus on particular things, right? So they have a macro function and a micro function, which is their real side, and then they have on their finance side I think capital markets function, financial intermediation, DSG modeling, DSG, etc. Anyway, the whole point is they have a bunch of different functions, and then they people from the function will interview you. And I think it was just, oh no, sorry, there were 2 rounds of interviews. There was a phone interview first with current research with research assistants, and then there was a follow-up interview with an economist from a function, and that one was function specific. And then from there, you get the decision, and you find out. I think, yeah, so it's that was a kind of a process that I think is very specific to the Federal Reserve, but I think in general, for policy-related research positions, you're definitely not going to have the, I think, amount of kind of networking and layers of interviews that are expected, particularly for, say, like iBanking. This is obviously going to differ depending on whether it's agency or NGO. But in general, you're not going to have that same kind of phenomenon. I think, yeah, and then I think for like long-term research assistant positions, like if you're someone who wants to go and work as a research assistant after school, I actually do not know about that process, and I recommend asking someone else. But my guess is that it's also like relatively informal compared to I'm sure that it's relatively informal compared to iBanking and consulting. I'm not sure what the like actual like level of formality is compared to like a job, another job versus or like finding a research position on campus. So.
Great. So those are all, fairly different process is. I'm gonna assume that you guys just weren't, born ready for this. And so I kind of wanted to ask, how did you guys prepare for this? Did you do like a My Fair Lady thing where like you learn how to dress up and talk, smoothly in interviews? Did you like study a micro textbook? How did you guys prepare yourselves for the selection process?
Okay, so to be honest, I'm pretty bad at preparing for interviews, I think. Usually I just like look up the place that I'm interviewing for and remind myself of like what's on my resume and try and remember things about it. That's really for me at least, in terms of like the actual like interviewing itself.
It's really, really, really important to know who exactly you're portraying yourself as, and what exactly all your documents say. Something I do before every interview is I go through my resume and try and give like a good short pitch of who I am and how I got where I am. You should be able to do it in like 2-3 minutes, maybe one, concisely. In terms of, for management consulting, you can always do cases. They'll come pretty naturally to you if you're like a math major and econ major. That's about all I do in terms of prep. Try to be relaxed when I go in. I find that if you go into the interview and you're very just vibing with your interviewer, then it tends to work out pretty well.
All right, I'll go. Yeah, I broadly agree with Nikhil and Elena. Mostly you want to just be able to tell a compelling story about yourself from your resume, and also be flexible enough to kind of like adapt as the conversation changes. You don't want your interviews to be super scripted. If it's just pure question response, that's probably a sign that it's not like a great interview, unless your interviewer is kind of awkward too, and they're just going through a checklist, which that happens sometimes. But for me, I'd heard that economic consulting sometimes had cases, and that's something that is only true at a small number of firms. And I tried to prepare, but basically you can't prepare, because what information there is online about like what economic consulting cases are is misleading at best. And anybody who tries to compare them to management consulting cases is like doesn't really know what they're talking about. Fundamentally, you just need to be like a little bit sharp and like understand very basic micro concepts and have some kind of business intuition as to what motivates like a company to like change the prices of some particular things. But it turned out that like whatever preparation I did didn't really matter. So I think the biggest preparation you can do is just kind of getting yourself in a place where you're comfortable talking about yourself in like a very glowing way, which is an awkward thing to do, but it's kind of fun once you get reasonably good at it.
I'd say probably the most important thing is to know yourself in terms of preparation. And I mean that in two ways. I mean that in the way that's been mentioned so far in terms of like understand your story and how you want to pitch it. But I also mean it in terms of like knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are going into preparation. So for me, I wasn't too concerned about like getting hit with a, tough question because, years of high school debate and then Model UN. So I'm used to like tough questions coming my way and being able to handle them. But I was really concerned about like information. Are they going to ask me something that's like really, finance tech, like super technical, and then all the people who are like finance majors at other schools are going to be able to get it. But, our econ department here, we're not studying finance in our econ department here. I'm glad we don't, but, that leaves you at a disadvantage for certain sets of questions. So filling in the gaps in your own, capacity to perform in an interview, whether that be certain types of knowledge gaps or, certain people might get in front of a mirror and just, practice giving, pitch about themselves, or get a friend in a reg room and practice getting grilled with tough questions. Lots of different things work for different people. I'd say on top of knowing yourself, it's also important to know yourself in the context of the industry, the group, and the firm that you're applying for. If it's a management consulting, then there are going to be cases. Like you should be knowing yourself in the context of cases. Can you handle a case well? Like if you know that you can't handle a case well, then yeah, you should be practicing cases. Know your group. So for me, that was really important. Had I not known that they'd be grilling me on my resume, then I wouldn't have been ready to like handle the attacks on my resume. I went over old notes I had from when I was doing different projects, and went over my textbooks and notes from old classes, because I knew they could ask about anything I learned in any of my previous classes, whereas typical groups won't ask about that. So have a sense of what they're probably going to want to ask you about, what they're going to expect from you, and have a sense of how much of that you can provide before starting preparation, and then use that preparation to kind of fill in the gaps as best you can. It always helps to speak with people who've been through an interview process with as close as you can get to that group. Like whether ideally someone in that group, if not someone in that firm, if not someone in that industry. So talk to people who've been through it before.
Thanks. Those are really great answers. So now we kind of want to open up for Q&A. If anyone who's watching has questions for the panelists, just type them down below in the chat box, and whoever has answers to them, you can just jump in and start answering. Well, while you guys think of questions and type them down, I'm just kind of curious, did any of you, you guys seem really confident, and you're obviously like good enough to get the job offers. So I was kind of wondering if you guys had any aha moments during undergrad where you realized you started out wanting to do one thing, and then you had this, complete change of heart and you went another way. How did you manage that? Did you kind of like have second guesses, like with the path that you chosen? If you could just speak about that. Because I'm pretty sure first and second years, like if you don't have a clear idea of what you're doing, you're always going to second guess yourself. You're going to change your majors and your career paths 10 different times. So if you guys had any of those moments, feel free to share.
I came into college as an anthropology major, and I guess my only real aha moment in college was my first week of college, when I realized I liked math a lot. And basically just realizing I like math made me do hard math. And then it just happened that econ was something it's really good to do with hard math.
Just because I'm similar, I'll kind of echo that. I came in, I thought I wanted to do physics. It turns out I didn't like physics, I just liked math. And as a math major, you have to either take some like classes in a particular department. And I was like, I don't want to take them in physics. And then I found, you could do math spec econ, and you take them in econ. And I don't know, I just kept doing that, and it turned out, I guess, pretty well.
I got kind of lucky. I came in thinking I wanted to do philosophy and econ, and I realized that I really enjoy philosophy and econ, and just kept doing philosophy and econ in terms of like academic interests. In terms of professional interests, I guess, I just rotated around based on what I enjoyed and what I didn't enjoy from the previous experience I'd had. I don't know if there were any like particular like core moments where I really had to reevaluate and dramatically change course. I'd say probably the most like introspection and reflection I did at any point was after I received my full-time offer before signing, because this is the first kind of step you make, even though I, really enjoyed the group and learned a lot and had fun and was probably going to sign, I did do a lot of introspection there, because this is the first step that I've kind of taken in my life that hasn't just made sense as like the immediate like
there's no question this is the next thing to do. Like after middle school, you go to high school. Like after high school, you go to college. And like I said, econ and philosophy just made sense for me. I didn't have to do any like major soul searching to figure out what I enjoyed academically. I took some classes in econ and philosophy in high school, really enjoyed them. Then college came along, just continued to really enjoy them. So this was the first like place where I've had serious, like a wide variety of options. You could, it's not clear what you're supposed to do after graduating college. So I did a lot of introspection to make sure that this was like the right next step for me. And then the aha moment was I signed. So it's still nothing like dramatic, no dramatic change of course.
Yeah, I have to say for me, that's kind of similar. I came in thinking I wanted to do econ and go into academia, and I'm leaving doing econ and thinking I want to go into academia. I will say, in the interim, I had this deviation where I thought, oh, maybe I really do want to do policy. I interned at the State Department, and I discovered that and at the City of Chicago Office of the Treasurer, and I discovered that it wasn't for me. But like, I can't say that I've had like a particular aha moment either. Yeah, so there's actually a question in the chat now. Could you name a few classes that you found helpful for what you wanted to do? So I'm guessing this means like specific course names. Okay, so I think if you're looking for an elective that you can take without econometrics, it's in the public policy department, but Professor Dubé offers a class on conflict, and it's very research-based. You read papers, you do stuff with those papers, you like critique the papers that you've read. It's like through Harris, but like there's an undergrads only version that she teaches. Obviously, econometrics is really important. And I think that was probably something that's true for all of us. Try to make sure that you get a good econometrics professor. I had Professor Turgovitsky, who's teaching honors econometrics this winter. He is great. I've heard terrible things about some of the other professors for econometrics. I know Chris Rourke. I don't know how he teaches, but I like know him and he seems to be nice. So I think he's good. I don't know. Probably. Yeah. So, and then in terms of classes that have projects, Hertoxy teaches an elective econometrics class where you write a paper. That one's pretty good, but not very good to take virtually. If you want, like, based on just like my impression of the class that I took versus the class that I had heard about from other people. Like, it was still good, but like that's a class you'd probably want to take in person.
I think one of the whole okay. I think one of the things that people, so for me, econometrics is important. I'm currently in some classes that are relevant, but like upper level economics electives that are relevant, statistics, obviously. Computer science is super relevant, so anything where you get to do projects with Python, R, Stata, those are relevant as in like the skills are directly applicable. But I think one of the areas that people often overlook is anything with writing is good for you, because I expect like half my job to be drafting and being able to like effectively parse legal documents or like go find sources in random PDFs, and being able to tell like a compelling story with good prose is like an essential skill. And it's not one that they'll necessarily check for in the interviews, but I think just as a general life skill, whether or not you want to go to academia or stay in the private sector, you kind of have to be able to write. So anything in like the English department, history, I've taken a lot of classes in like religious studies, and generally classes where you have like 2-3 papers. Doesn't really matter what you're writing about, your writing always gets better.
Yeah, that reminds me, actually, I took Global Society for Soc, and at least the year that I took it, there was like a required research paper at the end, and that was like very helpful. So like just kind of try and pay attention to what classes you need to like write for, and it's even more helpful if it's academic writing, but even if it's not, like, just writing is important.
The course I'm taking right now that is relevant to my job and I'm really enjoying is I'm taking the advanced IO sequence. Right now I'm taking AIO1 with Severson. And it's basically a seminar where you sit right now on Zoom with a professor and like 15 grad students, and you're just talking about different papers in empirical IO. And it's really nice. I feel like I have a much more thorough understanding of the metrics behind these papers than I did before. It also has this very big writing assignment at the end that I'm working on right now. So referee report, see how that goes.
I don't know if I have anything to add here.
I guess one quick thing I will add is that, like, not all the classes you take have to be devoted towards whatever your job is going to be. Like, it's good to take classes that are different. It's good to not have like 3 or 4 classes in a quarter that are all doing P sets. You're going to want some variety. Like, you really will. And it's and when doing that, make sure to like ask people for like recommendations, but it's good to take classes from other departments and like just learn something random.
Okay, that did inspire me to share one thing. Think about the marginal value you'll gain from learning like a new area. So kind of gaining access to a new discipline. I took one political science class, and I learned a lot more than I would have learned with like that extra one philosophy like seminar, even though, I love philosophy, I love econ, like, or that extra one econ seminar. I have the general sense of how problems are approached and how things are thought about in both economics and philosophy. I didn't have any sense of that in political science. So when I took that one class, it kind of gave me a whole new framework for approaching things. And I think that's definitely been useful in both economics and philosophy. So it's paid dividends in my disciplines of interest to go exploring other areas a little bit. So I'd advise not just filling up your course pre-registration with all the really interesting looking econometric electives. Have those, but have other things too.
Yeah, so there's a question about suggestions for getting better at Python or Stata other than taking classes. So this really depends on how self-motivated you are. You either have to take a class where you're forced to use it, or you have to convince yourself that there's a project that you want to do that requires you to use it. Stata is really annoying because Stata you have to pay for. So that one can be a little more complicated. Working as an RA is really great because you will be forced to use it, and in like honestly more applicable ways than you will for your classes. I know, so like Oeconomica, we have our workshop series. There's an organization out of the IOP called Tech Team that has a workshop series where they now do Python and R and like 2 different workshop series. In the fall, there's plenty of organizations on campus that do like random workshop series, but honestly the best way to learn like any kind of programming language is to just like do a project, because like going to a workshop and having someone like give you a bunch to tell you like here are a bunch of commands and here's what they do is not super helpful. Solving exercises, solving problems, thinking of something you want to do and doing it is. Now it can be hard to come up with projects, and that's where it is beneficial for like classes and workshops and all of that. And but there's also a lot of like free resources online for like all of these. That would honestly take too long to name.
Again, I'd like to insert my unbiased opinion and say that Oeconomica does a great job with the online coding workshops, which is hosted by none other than Elena here. So if you want to check that out, I think that'd be a really good idea.
So if you have like a basic grasp on Python or R and you're looking for like project ideas or some way to like apply your skills, something I found really helpful was this site called Kaggle, which has a ton of different challenges you can do that are all really time relevant. Um, I think one of the recent ones I saw was something about supply chains with this restaurant. Um, but they have data sets, they have challenges. You might get money for it if you do well. It's a great way to apply your skills if you have them.
Nicole, if you could just like type that down in the chat box, I think that'd be great.
Sure.
I was forced to learn basics of R through the 200 sequence for Econ. And I'm forcing myself to learn the basics of Python through 121. So classes have been where I've found most success, but I definitely recommend looking for other resources too.
Another thing is, even if your class doesn't like explicitly require you to program, you know, it can also be good practice to just like see what happens if you try and solve some PSET problems in like whatever language you're trying to like make yourself become better in. Sometimes it can also be helpful in terms of trying to figure out what you're trying to do with your PSET problems. Like if you have anything where you're like taking something to a limit, you can like run that and that'll help you know what you're looking for. So like I'm taking Markov chains by Lawler right now, which is a good class if you're interested in it. And there are definitely like PSET problems where we're explicitly asked to kind of code something, but there are also PSET problems where you're not, but it can be helpful to just like see what happens.
Yeah, I agree with everyone else. But also I found like reading books about software design useful, not so much that you practice things, but also like get some sense of like what good style is like. And additionally, just if you see like a stat in like a news article and you like question the stat, you can always just go find the data and just solve it yourself. It can take like 10 minutes, just upload it into Python and be like, what's the average of this? And I feel like that's a good way to kind of like engage in like short little snippets. For me, there's like a lot of COVID related data that I have enjoyed, despite it being bad, enjoyed working with.
So I think we're just about at time. So we'll stick around for a while later if you've got any questions that you want to ask in private. But you know, for the panelists, if you want to just wrap things up with I don't know, a final note to whoever's watching.
I don't know. If you're a first year, there's really not really any reason that you should have committed to like any particular path. For me, it took until my third year until I had any idea that I even was interested in economic consulting. And then just like John, I did a lot of soul searching before I signed. It was like, is this really what I want to do? I'm still not sure it's really what I want to do. So I don't want to give the impression that there's like some solution to this whole job thing. Just kind of be aware of what your options are at all times and solicit advice as much as you can. Those are my big picture words of wisdom.
I guess I'd say learn as much as you can about all your options. Talk to people. So you're all doing a great thing by coming to this. Talk to people who've done different things and listen to their reasons for choosing to do it. Hear whether or not they feel those reasons were fulfilled. Listen for the things that you're looking for in different types of jobs. See if they're talking about those. Listen for kind of what they were let down by, get the pros and cons and, what was expected and what was lived up on in the different kind of areas that you might be interested in. And on top of that, I'd also say no job is like permanent. No job is like everything. Feel free, especially if you're like a first year or second year, feel free to just experiment that summer, like totally just that summer, whatever you want to do. You can sell it to wherever you want to go that you like wanted to try this thing. No one's going to hold it against you for having like done something totally out of the like realm of the thing you end up then later on applying for. if you kind of spent a summer after second year or first year, like just playing around, trying something that, you thought you might be interested in. Even, so try different things. And, even where we are now, like none of our jobs are permanent. If you ask us 10 years from now, I bet most of us won't have the same things to say about why we're doing what we're doing, or we'll be in different places. So recognize the flexibility of a career path and your capacity to adjust over time would be the second piece.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really important to think about. It's just, even us seniors, we're not really locked into any paths yet. You're still very young. We have a very long life, hopefully, ahead of us. You have plenty of time to change careers if you don't like what you're doing. My mom at 50 stopped being an economist and became a landscape architect. You'll find something eventually. Just chill, keep working. It'll be good.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with that. And I think even if a job is like, most people who go through it end up doing something afterwards, there's always going to be a good chunk of people who do something else afterwards. And yeah, there are a lot of options in terms of changing careers. My mom went from being an engineer to a lawyer. There are paths from basically in a lot of directions that you can take. And you're not locked in by doing something during undergrad or doing something immediately after undergrad. And to be honest, you're probably still not locked in for a while afterwards. I mean, I've probably seen articles about like how people are changing jobs more frequently now and things like that. And that'll probably still be the case, at least for us. Who knows?
Great. Yeah, that was great advice. And hopefully whoever was watching can use it to, get a job and maybe get some cash money. But yeah, no, thank you so much for this panel. Our panelists were amazing. I'd just like to, thank all of you for sacrificing an hour in 8th week and for sharing your experience. I think we learned a lot from that. So that brings us to the end of the career panel. We're just going to hang around to see if anyone else has, private questions or whatever. But otherwise, that's the end. Thank you so much for attending. Good luck with the rest of the quarter. Thank you.
Thank you.